So one aspect where 2019 was not better than 2018 was movies. Not that it was a bad year for movies, more that it was just a fine year for movies. I'd say about 75 to 80% of the movies I've seen this year range from pretty good to mediocre. Still makes it better than 2013, and I probably saw less bad than I did in 2017, even when considering dishonorable mentions. I mean, with this year, I only have a few, like, Serenity was boring and just weird. Angel Has Fallen, I could barely even pay attention to. And The Curse of La Llorona was just forgettably dull. So I say let's just get into it. We're counting down the top 5 worst movies of 2019. Number 5. And the annual My Twitter Followers Hate Me and Pick This For Me to Watch in a Poll Movie of the Year is...
Didn't need no poke. And look at it, we done outlived him, laying there dead, and we still alive, still kicking. That pork got us kicking, dog. Bacon ain't never hurt nobody. Baby, why he smiling?
Okay, so before we start, I'll say that Tyler Perry seems like a decent dude who's given a lot of work to minorities in Hollywood. And he's not a bad actor. I've seen him do well in most movies I've seen him in. But he doesn't seem to be that good as a filmmaker. Now, this is only the second Madea movie I've seen. The other was A Madea Christmas. It wasn't the worst movie of 2013, not even close. And that's because it was so interestingly bad. Scenes would just transition for no rhyme or reason, and none of the character motivations made sense. Family Funeral is boring. Scenes don't end in this movie. I swear to God that the first 20 minutes consists of 3 scenes. They just wouldn't stop. Every time I thought it was gonna end and move on to the next scene, another character would just start talking. The second scene has no purpose. It's Tyler Perry's character Brian getting pulled over by a white cop, because we have to get the racist cop trope in there. But even then, the joke doesn't work because the cop is so over the top that all it made me realize is that Family Guy joke about white people in Tyler Perry movies was 100% accurate. The guy whose funeral the movie centers on, I'm pretty sure was never in any of the other movies. I mean, like I said, I've only seen one other, but the way they talk about him, I assume he wasn't in the others, and it's not funny. There's a 5-minute scene where Madea tries to close the casket, but she can't because the corpse still has an erection, and you know the thing about black people's dicks being huge. Oh, the wacky. The actors are trying, but the characters they are playing are just so obnoxious and loud, and none of their jokes were landing. Tyler Perry doesn't even seem like he has his heart in the Madea character because his real voice kept slipping out while playing her. There was so little plot that I had no idea what point we were at in the basic 3-act structure. Eventually, I looked at the time and saw there was only 10 minutes left and went, yeah, sure. And even though we managed to avoid it last year, it has made its return. Just like 9 Lives, The Boy Next Door, and The Dinner, this has one of the most abrupt endings.
I don't wanna play no games, play no games.
Number 4. I like the first 47 meters down. Was it flawed? Yes, but for a movie that was supposed to be direct to video and then dumped in theaters, I actually found it pretty suspenseful and well made. And now 2 years later, the same group of people, same directors, writers, cinematographer, editor, even music people, came back and created a movie that isn't nearly as good. First off, there is no reason this needed to be called 47 meters down. In the first movie, that's how far down they went in the cage. Here, they're always moving around. It's only called that because they had to connect it to the first movie. But that's a nitpick. My biggest problem is that all the characters are morons. Say what you will about the first film, but the 2 leads were pretty smart given the circumstances. Here, these 4 idiots go down into a newly discovered cave, not knowing anything about it and not telling anyone. But even the supposed experts aren't much better. The main character's dad found the cave and brings some people to explore it, and yet doesn't tell anyone or bring any weapons or use some kind of equipment to make sure it's safe, and every other decision they make is just as dumb. The movie would have been a half-hour long if the 2 dumbass popular girls didn't try to climb the rope at the same time, and they continue making noise even though the sharks can't see. It's not as well made as the first movie either. The first had a lower budget, and yet this is the one that feels more like a direct-to-DVD movie. And there's so much slow motion, it's almost comical, and I can barely tell the girls apart most of the time, and it it feels so dragged out. The climax keeps throwing shit at them, and I just wanted it to end. And I actually have a problem that's a pretty big spoiler, and I just want to talk about it. So if you want to avoid the spoilers, go here. One of the big arcs is Mia and Sasha learning to like each other, since they're stepsisters and neither of them wants to hang out with each other. But not only do they not really learn anything about each other, but if I were Mia, I would never want to talk to Sasha again, given that it was her stupid decision that led to her dad dying. It can't even really be enjoyed as a cheesy, fun, guilty pleasure because it's so dramatic and a lot of the deaths are too realistically harsh. To be fair, the acting is decent and there are a few legit suspenseful scenes, but this is not only one of the worst movies I saw this year, but probably the most disappointing. I wasn't a huge fan of Crawl, but if you want a movie from this year that's a girl versus underwater creatures, watch that.
Can we just talk? Can we just talk? Figure out where we're growing.
Number 3. So I really don't like calling out commenters, but over the past few years on my worst of the year list, someone will just comment saying, you don't have any franchise movies on your list. I mean, all your picks are so obvious. Well, here, buddy, this one's for you.
I said stop that right now!
It's not me.
It's me.
Gene?
So I've seen almost every X-Men movie, the only exception being X-Men Origins Wolverine. But I've liked pretty much every other one, even Apocalypse in 2013 Wolverine movie. The only one I wasn't a fan of was The Last Stand, which is interesting because this movie tries to do the same storyline as The Last Stand, and yet it's so much worse. At least X3 had some cool action scenes and tried to have some emotion, it just had too much going on. Dark Phoenix is a nothing movie. It's a film that seems like it's just trying to get itself over with as quickly as possible. There's no style, no personality, no suspense, no interesting drama or comedy. It's a movie that sets up its plot and goes through it. And even that it doesn't do very well. The actors all look bored, especially Jennifer Lawrence, who gives by far the worst performance I've seen from her. To be fair, James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender at least looked like they were trying to bring some life into their characters, but the writing on them is so dull. The villains are a fucking joke, I didn't care about them, they weren't interesting. The action, cinematography, and special effects are all so meh. Not really bad, but don't have any style, they're just as baseline competent. It's supposed to be set in the 90s because this timeline makes no sense, but it never looks like it. If you want a superhero movie set in the 90s, go see Captain Marvel. Hell, it even has similar villains, except those guys were interesting. And honestly, that's all I can even remember. I just didn't care enough to commit most of this movie to memory. It was boring and lame. And as far as I'm concerned, the last time we see these characters is not in this movie, it's their 2-second cameo in Deadpool 2.
Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I'm no good at goodbyes.
Number 2. Fuck this movie. I know I'm gonna get pushback for this, but I hated this more than both Norm of the North and the Emoji Movie. Yes, it looks better, but it also pissed me off more. I hate the main character. June is pretentious, dumb, and kind of just an all-around shitty person. All the other characters are obnoxious, the bear, the beavers, the boar. They're all generic and pretty fucking pointless. In the grand scheme of things, they barely do anything. The only character I even remotely found charming was the John Oliver porcupine, and that's only because he's voiced by John Oliver. But even with him, they have to shoehorn in a romance with a Mila Kunis boar, because let's just rip off the nerdy, overly safety-concerned character hooking up with the sassy girl character from the Madagascar movies. Except in those, they got development. Here, it's brought up once and then not again until the end. It has huge tonal shifts, and that will go from a whimsical montage between June and her mother, where they're building a model theme park even though she was supposed to be grounded for destroying the neighborhood because these two suck at parenting, and then we jump to the mom getting cancer. And the way they handle this plot point is so fucking insulting. Her grief for her dying mother is the thing destroying Wonderland. And what could have been a nice metaphor about sadness basically says that being sad is a bad thing, which no, it's fucking not. Especially when one of your parents is dying. It has the lamest third act breakup I've ever seen. There was no reason they should have separated, and for a movie about the power of imagination, there's no creativity. The plot, characters, and dialogue are all generic. Saying splendiferous 50 times doesn't make you imaginative, and even the park is lame. All the rides are just basic things you'd see at a Six Flags or even a fair. The only ride that isn't generic rips off the juggler from Spy Kids 2, but I could have maybe handled all of that. There was one thing that pissed me off more than all of that combined. It never shuts up. It's just constant noise, loud music, sound effects, screaming. Every 5 minutes needs some kind of chase scene because they think if they don't have one, they'll lose the kids' attention. And this wouldn't be so bad, except the editing and direction are so bad, I can't tell what's going on in them half the time. And even when it's just characters talking to each other, there's no space between the dialogue. When one character's done talking, another character will immediately start. This movie annoyed me so much that I actually felt old watching it. Again, the animation, voice acting, even the score, they're all good, and I did laugh at some of the John Oliver lines and the fact that they straight up murder some of the chimpan zombies, but this movie pissed me off just as much as the most bottom of the barrel direct-to-video animated movie. Fuck you, Wonder Park. Fuck you, and fuck your shitty main character too.
I'm gonna take my horse to the old town road. I'm gonna ride till I can't no more.
Number 1. I heard this was bad, but you can't prepare yourselves for how bad it really is.
I don't like the idea of some underworld.
This is one of those movies that has so many problems that part of me wants to review it. If it wasn't so boring, I probably would, but unless it wins Worst Picture and I have to talk about it in March, I don't ever want to watch it again. We'll start with the acting. Everyone is bad. No one sounds invested. It feels like they all had no idea what they were doing, but poor Hilary Duff is the worst. And it's not her fault. She had to do this awful accent through most of the movie, and so comes across like a 6th grader in a school play. This is the worst thing she's ever been in, and yes, I'm including Food Fight. Don't worry, Hilary, that Lizzie McGuire spinoff on Disney Plus is right around the corner. The directing is bad in that I don't think a single decision was right. The camera never stops moving. Literally, it never stops moving. The music is bad and is actually kind of annoying, and the editing might be some of the worst I've ever seen. There's a part with a dead dog that's just a bunch of quick cuts with blaring music. There's no suspense, none. I never once felt scared or thrilled. Despite this being labeled as a horror thriller, the dialogue is awful and has not one, but two fake out dream sequences that were so bad, I wanted to shut the damn thing off. I didn't really like any of the characters, they were all kind of assholes. It's padded as fuck, and it's so boring that I was anticipating the deaths of real people. But then there's the ending, which was so jaw-droppingly awful that I wanted to find the family of these people and personally apologize on behalf of the film community. One of the worst endings I've ever seen. I really try to find at least one positive thing about every movie on these lists, but I struggled here. I guess some of the cinematography could be okay in the more action-heavy moments, and the production design is okay. I mean, it's not great, but it looks enough like the 60s. But that's grasping at straws. The Haunting of Sharon Tate isn't just a bad movie, it's an insultingly bad movie. It's a straight-up insult to the actual people it's based on. Don't watch it! Well, that's it. So join me tomorrow for the best of the year. Bye.
I was getting kinda used to being someone you loved. Cases fumes. She fill my mind up with ideas. I'm the highest in the room. Hope I make it out of here.